Part 1, The Galactic Stalemate. For 300 long years, two massive alien empires had been staring each other down across a stretch of empty space called the Neutral Zone. The VRYNN hegemony on one side, the Talaxian Confederacy on the other. Neither side dared to blink. Neither side dared to move. They just sat there in their enormous warships, weapons charged, waiting for the other to make the first mistake. It was the kind of standoff that had become almost comfortable over the centuries. Everyone knew the rules. Everyone played their part. The entire galaxy had adjusted to this frozen conflict. Trade routes went around their territories. Smaller species paid tribute to both sides just to be left alone. Diplomats kept talking, but nothing ever really changed. Commander Blake Turner sat in the command chair of his VRYNN dreadnought, doing what he had done every single day for the past 2 years. His eyes scanned the holographic displays floating in front of him, counting enemy ships. 17 massive battlecruisers hung in the darkness across the zone. 43 destroyers positioned in precise formation. Hundreds of smaller support vessels scattered throughout the fleet. Every single ship exactly where it had been yesterday, and the day before that, and the day before that. Blake had memoized every vessel, every position, every tactical formation. It was mind-numbing work, but it was necessary. The Talaxians were doing the same thing on their side, watching his fleet with the same tired vigilance. Both sides had enough weapons to turn entire star systems into dust. Both sides knew that if anyone fired first, everyone would die. So nobody fired. Nobody moved. The great machine of war just sat there, rusting in the silence of space. The junior officers on the bridge moved through their routines with the same bored efficiency they showed every shift. Checking sensors that never changed. Monitoring communications that never came. Running diagnostics on weapons that would probably never fire. It was the ultimate military paradox. They were the most powerful fleet in their part of the galaxy, and they were completely useless. Blake rubbed his eyes and reached for his coffee. It was cold again. Everything felt cold out here in the eternal standoff. Cold and pointless, and the sensor alarm screamed to life. Blake's coffee went flying as he lunged forward in his chair. Every display on the bridge exploded with frantic red warnings. Officers shouted over each other, trying to make sense of what they were seeing. The calm routine of 300 years shattered in an instant. Something had appeared in the neutral zone. Not emerged from hyperspace like a normal ship. Not come through one of the jump gates that connected different parts of the galaxy. It had just appeared, as if reality itself had been torn open and something had stepped through the hole. The energy readings were off the charts, unlike anything in their databases. Blake's hands moved across his control panel, pulling up every scanner they had. The image that formed made his blood run cold. A vessel hung in the exact center of the neutral zone, right between the two fleets. It was massive. Larger than anything either empire had ever built. Its hull was dark and angular, covered in strange markings that looked almost primitive. The computer couldn't identify what it was made of. Every analysis came back with errors and question marks. Across the zone, Blake knew the Talaxian fleet was seeing the same thing. For the first time in living memory, both sides had something more important to worry about than each other. Warning klaxons blared on every ship in both fleets. Weapons that had been on standby for decades suddenly came to full power. Targeting computers locked onto the intruder from 1,000 different angles. Blake opened a command channel, his voice tight with tension. He demanded identification from the unknown vessel. Threatened it with immediate destruction if it didn't respond. Beside him, his tactical officer confirmed that the Talaxians were doing the exact same thing, broadcasting their own threats and demands. The mysterious ship just floated there, silent and still, like it had all the time in the world. Like it wasn't surrounded by enough firepower to crack a planet in half. Then it spoke. The voice came through every communication channel at once, in a language that Blake had never heard before. The computer's translation software struggled to keep up, but the meaning was clear enough. The words were calm, almost casual, with an undercurrent of absolute certainty. This is the UESS Indomitable. Stand down or be disabled. We're here to talk. Blake stared at the transmission data scrolling across his screen. UESS. United Earth Starship. Uff? He searched his memory of galactic species and territories. Nothing. The computer came up empty too. Nobody had ever heard of Earth. Nobody knew who these humans were or where they had come from. But they had just appeared in the middle of the most dangerous military standoff in the galaxy, and they were giving orders like they owned the place. The bridge of Blake's dreadnought hummed with nervous energy. Officers whispered to each other in tight clusters, checking and rechecking their instruments. Nobody had training for this. Nobody had protocols for dealing with ships that appeared out of thin air and started giving orders. The translation software continued its desperate work, breaking down the structure of this strange human language, building dictionaries on the fly, trying to make sense of syntax that followed completely alien patterns. But Blake didn't need perfect translation to understand the tone of that voice. It was the way the human spoke that chilled him to his core. There was no hesitation, no uncertainty, no fear. Just absolute confidence. The kind of confidence that came from knowing something everyone else didn't. Like a player who had already seen the end of the game and was just waiting for the other pieces to catch up. His communication officer, a young VRYN named Keston, stared at him with eyes wide as moons. The kid's hand hovered over his console, trembling slightly. "Sir?" he asked, his voice cracking. "What should I respond?" Blake opened his mouth, then closed it again. "What do you say?" The standard protocols were useless here. Demand identification? They'd already done that. Threaten destruction? The humans hadn't even flinched. Order them to leave? Something told Blake that wouldn't go well either. Around the bridge, the entire crew had gone silent, waiting for their commander to make a decision. Blake could feel the weight of their expectations pressing down on him. He was supposed to have answers. He was supposed to know what to do. But he was just as lost as they were. The sensor operator broke the silence. "Sir, we're receiving a transmission from the Talaxian flagship." Blake's head snapped around. "What?" "Commander Hayes is requesting a secure channel. Priority 1. He wants to coordinate with us." For a moment, Blake thought he'd misheard. The Talaxians? Wanting to coordinate? With them? In 300 years of Cold War, the two sides had exchanged exactly 3 types of communications: threats, demands, and the occasional insult. They certainly never coordinated anything. But then Blake understood. This human vessel had done something remarkable. It had given them a common enemy. For the first time in centuries, the VRYN and Talaxians were on the same side of a problem. Blake authorized the channel. Hayes appeared on his screen, a crystalline being whose translated expression looked just as disturbed as Blake felt. Neither commander wasted time on pleasantries or accusations. They had bigger problems now. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. Hayes was direct. "We can't let this stand. They've violated the zone. They're disrupting everything." Blake nodded. "Agreed. We show them force. Together." "Warning shots only," Hayes said. "Coordinated strike. Show them what they're dealing with." It felt wrong, working with the enemy. Every instinct Blake had developed over his military career screamed against it. But it also felt necessary. The humans needed to understand that there were rules here. That you couldn't just appear in the middle of a galactic standoff and start making demands. That there were consequences for disrespect. Blake turned to his tactical officer. "Prepare a coordinated strike with the Talaxian fleet. 34 plasma lances, target the human vessel's stern section. Disable, not destroy. We're sending a message." His officer's hands flew across the controls. Across the void, the Talaxian ships were doing the same thing, preparing their railguns, targeting the same vessel that had so rudely interrupted their centuries-long dance of death. The countdown began. 10 seconds. Blake watched the tactical display, seeing both fleets moving in perfect synchronization. It was beautiful in a way, 2 enemies working as one. 9 seconds. 8 seconds. The weapons charged, building up the massive energy needed to hurt something that size. 5 seconds. 4. 3. Blake gave the order. "Fire." The void lit up like a newborn star. 34 bolts of superheated plasma erupted from VRYN ships, each one containing enough energy to vaporize a small moon. They streaked across the darkness, brilliant and deadly. At the same instant, 72 chunks of hyperdense metal launched from Talaxian railguns, accelerated to speeds that turned them into relativistic weapons of mass destruction. These were the weapons that had kept 2 galactic superpowers in check for 3 centuries. Weapons so powerful that both sides knew using them would mean the end of everything. Weapons that had been tested, refined, and perfected but never actually fired in anger. Until now. Blake watched the tactical display with grim satisfaction. The barrage would hit in 3 seconds. The message would be clear: respect the balance, or be destroyed. 2 seconds. 1 second. Impact. Except there was no impact. The Indomitable's hull suddenly came alive. What had looked like smooth, solid metal transformed in an instant. Thousands of small hatches opened across its surface, and from each one emerged a small turret. They moved with impossible speed and precision, tracking, calculating, adjusting their aim in fractions of a second. Then they fired. Not with anything fancy. Not with plasma or particle beams or any of the exotic weapons that modern warfare demanded. They fired bullets. Simple, old-fashioned kinetic projectiles. The kind of primitive technology that civilized species had abandoned thousands of years ago when they discovered energy weapons. But these bullets moved with surgical precision. Each turret tracked its target with computers that must have been impossibly advanced. They calculated trajectory, velocity, impact angles, all in the split second it took for the VRYNN and Talaxian weapons to close the distance. The point defense system opened up like a metal storm, filling the space between the fleets with a wall of supersonic rounds. Blake watched in horror as every single plasma lance was intercepted. The bullets hit them mid-flight, disrupting their magnetic containment, causing them to disperse into harmless clouds of superheated gas that cooled and faded almost instantly. The mass driver slugs fared no better. The human bullets hit them dead center, shattering the hyperdense metal into fragments that tumbled away harmlessly. Not one weapon got through. Not one. The tactical officer ran the numbers again, hoping his instruments were malfunctioning. "Sir, I'm showing 100% interception rate. Complete defensive success. The targeting accuracy is..." He paused, checking his readings a third time. "Sir, it's beyond anything in our databases. The reaction time alone shouldn't be possible." Blake felt something cold settle in his stomach. They'd just thrown everything they had at that ship. The combined might of two galactic superpowers, weapons that could crack planets, and the humans had swatted it away like an annoying insect. Not struggled, not barely survived, but casually dismissed it like it was nothing. The human voice came back through the speakers, and this time Blake could hear a slight edge to it. Not anger exactly, but the tone of someone whose patience was starting to wear thin. Like a parent dealing with children who weren't listening. "We said stand down. We won't ask again." Blake's mouth had gone completely dry. His hands gripped the armrests of his command chair so hard that his knuckles turned white. Around him, the bridge crew sat in stunned silence. A few looked terrified. Others looked like they couldn't believe what they'd just witnessed. His tactical officer pulled up the defensive analysis, and the numbers were damning. The humans had used point defense technology that was theoretically possible but practically impossible to implement. The computing power needed to track and intercept that many targets simultaneously would require processors beyond anything either empire possessed. The energy efficiency was perfect. The targeting accuracy was flawless. It was like watching someone from the future fight someone from the past. Before Blake could even begin to process what to do next, the sensor alarm blared again. The Indomitable moved. Not the slow, ponderous movement of a capital ship building momentum. Not the careful acceleration that every vessel had to use to avoid turning its crew into paste against the back wall. The human ship simply moved, going from stationary to high speed in an instant. The acceleration should have been fatal. Blake did the math in his head and felt sick. The G-forces inside that ship had to be crushing. Nothing biological could survive that kind of movement. And yet the vessel moved with perfect control, crossing 10,000 kilometers in less than 5 seconds, repositioning itself with casual ease. It stopped directly between the VRYNN and Talaxian fleets. The tactical implications were obvious and devastating. Now if either side wanted to shoot at the other, they'd have to go through the humans first. The Indomitable sat there like a referee who'd stepped between two fighters, daring either one to try something stupid. Blake stared at the tactical display, his mind racing through scenarios. They could try to go around. They could attempt another coordinated strike. They could call for reinforcements from deeper in VRYNN territory. But every option felt hollow. Every plan seemed pointless against a species that could move like that, defend like that, and probably attack in ways they hadn't even seen yet. The transmission changed. A new voice came through, male and human, speaking with the kind of easy authority that came from complete control of the situation. "I am Captain Ryan Mitchell of United Earth. Your Cold War ends today. We're convening a summit, and both of you are attending. Any ship that attempts to leave will be escorted back. Any ship that opens fire will be disabled. We've been watching your species threaten each other for long enough. Time to grow up." Blake sat frozen in his command chair. In the span of maybe 10 minutes, everything had changed. 300 years of careful balance, 300 years of established order, 300 years of knowing exactly where everyone stood and what the rules were. All of it gone, swept away by a species nobody had ever heard of. A species that had technology that made their best weapons look primitive. A species that moved through space like they'd broken the laws of physics. A species that had just taken control of the most dangerous military standoff in the galaxy and done it so easily that resistance seemed almost comical. His communication officer looked at him, waiting for orders. The tactical officer waited for commands. The entire bridge crew waited for their commander to tell them what to do next. But Blake had nothing. No orders, no commands, no clever strategies. For the first time in his military career, he was completely and utterly outmatched. The old rules didn't matter anymore. The old strategies were worthless. Humanity had arrived, and they'd just rewritten every rule in the book without even breaking a sweat. The news spread through the galaxy like wildfire. Within hours, every major government, every trading consortium, every military alliance had heard about what happened in the neutral zone. An unknown species calling themselves humans had appeared from nowhere, positioned themselves between two galactic superpowers, and basically told them both to sit down and shut up. The audacity of it was breathtaking. The implications were terrifying. The VRYNN hegemony's response was swift and furious. Emergency sessions were called. Military advisors shouted at diplomatic corps who shouted at intelligence officers who had absolutely no intelligence to offer. How do you prepare for a threat you didn't know existed? The formal protest was drafted, redrafted, and drafted again before being sent to the Council of Free Worlds. It demanded immediate action, immediate intervention, immediate removal of these human interlopers who had violated every diplomatic protocol in existence. The Talaxian Confederacy did exactly the same thing. Their protest used different words but carried the same desperate energy. Both empires, which hadn't agreed on anything in 3 centuries, now found themselves making identical demands to the same governing body. The Council of Free Worlds received both protests and went into emergency session. Representatives from dozens of species gathered in their grand chamber, reading the reports with growing confusion and alarm. But when they searched their databases for information about Earth or humans, they found nothing. Not even a footnote. Not a single reference. These humans had somehow reached interstellar travel capability without anyone noticing. Without joining any of the established trade networks. Without making first contact through any of the proper channels. The Council sent their own ships to investigate, but by the time they arrived, the situation had already moved to the next phase. The humans had sent a shuttle to the old diplomatic station that sat abandoned in the middle of the neutral zone. A station that hadn't been used in over a century, where ancient peace talks had failed and been forgotten. Blake received the orders from High Command. Attend the summit. Represent the VRYNN hegemony. Find out what these humans want. And above all, do not, under any circumstances, start a war that his people couldn't win. The last instruction was delivered with unusual frankness. His superiors had seen the battle recordings. They knew what their fleet was up against. The shuttle ride to the station felt surreal. Blake sat in uncomfortable silence across from a Talaxian delegation that included his counterpart, Commander Vincent Shaw. In any other situation, they'd be enemies. But now they were both just confused military officers trying to deal with something completely outside their experience. The station's old docking bay opened for them automatically. Someone had already reactivated the ancient systems. The corridors were lit and pressurized. In the central conference chamber, a human was waiting. Captain Ryan Mitchell was not what Blake had expected. He'd imagined someone imposing, someone physically intimidating to match that massive warship. Instead, Mitchell was average height by human standards, which made him noticeably shorter than most of the alien delegates. He wore a simple uniform with minimal decoration. His hair was starting to show gray at the temples. He looked like he could be someone's dad, not the commander of the most advanced warship anyone had ever seen. But then Mitchell smiled, and Blake saw that same confidence he'd heard in the voice over the communications channel. The captain moved with easy grace, completely comfortable despite being surrounded by aliens who, up until yesterday, could have crushed his entire species without breaking a sweat. Or so they'd thought. Gentlemen, ladies, and everything in between, Mitchell said, gesturing to seats around a conference table that had been gathering dust for decades. Thanks for coming. I know this wasn't exactly voluntary, but here we are. Commander Shaw spoke first, his translator rendering his crystalline speech patterns into something approximating anger. You have violated every diplomatic protocol. You have threatened 2 sovereign empires. You have no right to. Let me stop you right there, Mitchell interrupted, his tone friendly but firm. I'm going to save us all some time. You're going to threaten me with your fleets. I'm going to remind you what happened when you tried that. You're going to demand I leave. I'm going to refuse. You're going to appeal to the Council of Free Worlds. They're going to tell you they've never heard of us and can't help. So let's skip all that theater and get to the actual conversation. He tapped a control on the table, and a holographic star chart sprang to life above them. It showed their region of space in brilliant detail. Mitchell pointed to a small yellow star on the edge of the mapped territory. This is Earth. About 40 light-years from your nearest border posts. Close enough to watch, far enough that you never noticed us. He zoomed in, and the solar system appeared in miniature. We've been aware of you for about 60 years. That's when our deep space telescopes got good enough to detect your fleet movements and energy signatures. Blake stared at the display. 60 years? Humans had been watching them for 60 years and nobody had known? The intelligence failure was staggering. Mitchell continued, his tone conversational, like he was teaching a class. We've been monitoring your Cold War, your occasional skirmishes with smaller species, your proxy conflicts through a dozen different territories. Very civilized. Very calculated. Very, very wasteful. He said that last word with particular emphasis. You've both been so focused on each other that you've stagnated. 300 years of the same posturing, the same threats, the same pointless standoff. You have no authority to judge us, human, Blake said, finally finding his voice. You have no authority here at all. Mitchell's smile widened. You're right. I don't have authority. I don't need authority. He manipulated the hologram, zooming back out to show Earth's solar system. Let me show you something. The display changed, showing dozens of ship signatures orbiting Earth, Mars, and several other bodies in the system. Every signature was comparable in size to the Indomitable. Some were even larger. The room went deathly silent. 43 capital ships, Mitchell said calmly. Another 120 smaller vessels. All with the same technology you saw yesterday. All ready to deploy if needed. He let that sink in for a moment. Now, you can keep protesting. You can keep making demands. You can keep playing your 300-year-old game. Meanwhile, we're going to establish trade routes through both your territories. We're going to make contact with all those species you've both been bullying. We're going to set up our own diplomatic and economic network. He paused, looking each delegate in the eye. Or, you can start talking to each other. Really talking. And maybe, just maybe, you can benefit from what we're offering. Commander Shaw leaned forward. And what exactly are you offering? Technology exchange. Open trade. Mutual defense pacts. Access to resources and knowledge you haven't even dreamed of. Mitchell pulled up another display showing complex engineering schematics that made Blake's head hurt just looking at them. We've been spacefaring for less time than you've been at war. Want to know our secret? Nobody answered, but everyone was listening. Motivation, Mitchell said simply. When we reached for the stars, Earth was dying. Climate collapse, resource depletion, political fragmentation. We had maybe a century before everything fell apart. We had to cooperate or go extinct. Every nation, every corporation, every military force had to work together or watch humanity end. He closed the schematics and brought up an image of Earth, beautiful and blue against the darkness of space. We had to unite a planet with 200 different countries, thousands of different cultures, hundreds of different languages. People who had been enemies for centuries. And we did it because we had no other choice. We learned to talk or die. Mitchell looked at Blake, then at Shaw. You two have been comfortable. Your stalemate isn't threatening your survival. It's just expensive and pointless. But it's familiar. You know the rules. You know your roles. Change is scary. So you're forcing change on us, Blake said. I'm offering you a choice, Mitchell corrected. Keep your Cold War and watch as humanity builds the future around you. Or join us. Reduce your military presence by 60%. Establish joint trade zones. Actually try to coexist. In exchange, we'll share our technology, our resources, our knowledge. 60% reduction? Shaw's translator barely kept up with his outrage. That's unacceptable. That would leave us vulnerable to each other? Mitchell smiled. If you're both reducing by the same amount, the balance stays the same. Unless you don't trust each other to follow through. Which, honestly, is probably fair. He shrugged. But that's what verification protocols are for. That's what neutral observers are for. That's what actual diplomacy looks like. Blake ran the calculations in his head. A 60% reduction would still leave both sides with enough firepower to defend themselves. It would just force them to stop maintaining these massive, useless fleets that did nothing but stare at each other. The resources freed up could go to infrastructure, research, exploration. Things that actually benefited people. But it would also mean trusting the Talaxians. It would mean abandoning 3 centuries of military doctrine. It would mean change. You realize what you're asking is impossible, Blake said quietly. No, Mitchell replied. I'm realizing that what you've been doing for 300 years is impossible. You can't maintain this forever. Eventually, someone makes a mistake. Someone fires. Everyone dies. We're offering you a way out. He stood up, placing both hands on the table. I'm giving you both 1 week to think about it. Discuss it with your governments. Run your analyses. Do whatever you need to do. But understand this, humanity is here now. The galaxy is changing whether you like it or not. You can change with it, or you can be left behind. Mitchell headed toward the door, then paused. Oh, and one more thing. We've already started making contact with some of the smaller species in this region. The ones who've been stuck paying tribute to both of you just to survive. They're very interested in alternative trading partners. Just thought you should know. With that, the human captain left the chamber, leaving behind a room full of shell-shocked alien diplomats who were finally starting to understand that their comfortable, predictable universe had just been turned completely upside down. The week that Captain Mitchell had given them turned into 6 days of the most intense negotiations the galaxy had seen in centuries. The old diplomatic station, forgotten and abandoned for so long, suddenly became the center of everything. Ships arrived from both empires carrying advisors, military analysts, economists, and politicians. Everyone wanted to understand what was happening. Everyone wanted to influence the outcome. Blake barely slept during those 6 days. His quarters on the station were small and uncomfortable, but he spent most of his time in the conference chambers anyway, arguing with his own people as much as with the Talaxians. The VRYNN delegation was split down the middle. Half wanted to reject the human ultimatum outright, to maintain their pride and their military strength no matter the cost. The other half had seen the recordings of that brief battle and understood that pride was a luxury they could no longer afford. But it wasn't just the military demonstration that had everyone terrified. It was what they learned about humanity during those long days of negotiation. On the 3rd day, a VRYNN scientist named Kelvin presented his analysis of human technology to the assembled delegations. He'd been given access to some basic technical specifications, nothing classified, just enough to understand how the humans had built what they built. What he found shocked everyone in the room. They didn't discover anything new, Kelvin explained, his voice trembling with a mixture of awe and fear. They're not using exotic physics or ancient alien technology. Everything they have, we could theoretically build. We just never thought to do it this way. Commander Shaw leaned forward. Explain. Kelvin pulled up a holographic comparison. Take their point defense systems. The ones that intercepted our combined barrage. They're using rapid-fire kinetic weapons guided by distributed computing networks. We've known about this technology for centuries. We've just never implemented it because it seemed inefficient. Too many moving parts. Too complex to coordinate. Too much could go wrong. But it works, Blake said quietly. It works because they threw insane amounts of resources at making it work, Kelvin replied. Their computing systems are orders of magnitude more powerful than ours. Not because they have better processors, but because they have more of them. Thousands of small computers working together instead of one big one. It's redundant, it's expensive, and it's absolutely brilliant because if one system fails, the others compensate instantly. He pulled up more data. Their propulsion systems? Same story. We know the physics. We just never pushed the engineering this far because it seemed unnecessary. Their hull materials? Advanced ceramics and composites that we could manufacture, we just never bothered because our current armor was good enough. Everything they have is just our technology taken to an extreme we never considered. The room fell silent as everyone processed this information. It was somehow more disturbing than if the humans had found some ancient alien cache of superweapons. That would have been luck, a cosmic accident. But this? This was intentional. This was humanity looking at the same technology everyone else had and deciding that good enough wasn't actually good enough. On the 4th day, Captain Mitchell brought in some of his crew to explain how human society actually worked. What they described sounded like controlled chaos. A human engineer named Tyler explained their colonial structure. We have 42 independent colonies spread across 12 star systems. Each one has its own government, its own laws, its own military forces. Earth doesn't control them. We can't even agree on a common currency. A Talaxian diplomat interrupted. But how do you coordinate? How do you maintain order? Tyler grinned. We don't. Not in the way you're thinking. Each colony competes with the others. For resources, for population, for prestige. Mars is trying to build better ships than Europa. Titan is trying to develop better AI than Ganymede. It's messy and inefficient, and it drives innovation at a pace that terrifies our own politicians. Another human, a woman named Jordan who worked in corporate research, added more context. Then you have the corporations. Hundreds of them, all competing for market share. Each one has their own research labs, their own engineering teams. When one company develops something new, every other company has to match it or go out of business. It's brutal, but it means we're constantly pushing forward. Blake tried to wrap his head around it. So you're telling me that you achieved all this through competition? Through chaos. Through necessity, Mitchell corrected. When Earth started dying, we couldn't afford to wait for some central authority to fix everything. Every group, every nation, every company had to innovate or die. We had to move fast. Faster than was comfortable. Faster than was safe, honestly. He pulled up an image that showed Earth as it had been 60 years ago. The planet looked sick, covered in brown smog, ice caps melting, oceans rising. This was our homeworld when we detected your fleets. We knew there were other species out there, advanced species with technology we didn't have. And we realized we were behind. Way behind. While you two were playing your stalemate game, we were scrambling to survive and catch up at the same time. Mitchell changed the image to show Earth as it was now. Cleaner, healthier, with massive orbital stations and space elevators connecting the surface to the stars. We had to unite to save our planet. But we also had to compete to develop the technology we needed. So we did both. Every colony works together when it matters, but they also push each other to be better, faster, stronger. A young VRYNN officer asked the question everyone was thinking. But doesn't that lead to conflict? Doesn't competition breed hostility? Jordan answered. Sometimes. We've had disputes. We've had close calls. But we learned something important. You can compete without killing each other. You can push each other to improve without destroying everything. Because at the end of the day, we're all still human. We still need each other. She gestured at the VRYNN and Talaxian delegates. You two have been so focused on not losing to each other that you've both stopped winning. You've maintained the balance, sure. But you've also maintained stagnation. For 300 years, you've built nothing new, discovered nothing new, achieved nothing new. You've just been standing still, watching each other. The words stung because they were true. Blake thought about his own career, 2 decades spent counting enemy ships and running the same drills over and over. What had he actually accomplished? What had any of them accomplished? They'd maintained the status quo. They'd kept the peace through the threat of mutual destruction. But they hadn't built anything. They hadn't grown. They'd just existed. On the 5th day, Mitchell laid out the actual terms of his proposal. The formal offer that would either change everything or end in disaster. Open technological exchange, he began, pulling up detailed documents. We share our engineering knowledge. You share your knowledge of this region of space, your contacts with other species, your established trade networks. Everyone benefits. Free passage through human space. Your merchants, your explorers, your researchers. Come and go as you please. All we ask is the same courtesy in return. A mutual defense pact. If either of you is attacked by an outside force, humanity will help. If humanity is attacked, you help us. We stop seeing each other as threats and start seeing each other as allies. He paused, and his expression became more serious. But this only works if you two stop threatening each other. Reduce your military forces at the border by 60%. Not eliminate them, just reduce them. Use those resources for something productive. And establish joint trade zones where both your species can operate freely. Prove that you can coexist. The demand sent shockwaves through both delegations. 60% reduction meant decommissioning or relocating hundreds of ships. It meant fundamentally changing military doctrines that had been in place for centuries. It meant trust, and trust was something neither empire had experienced in a very long time. Blake's superior officers on the VRYNN homeworld sent frantic messages. This was unacceptable. This was surrender. This was the end of everything they'd built. But Mitchell had one more card to play. On the 6th day, he showed them projections. Computer models of what would happen if they refused. Humanity continues expanding, he explained, highlighting new colony sites on the star map. We make separate deals with all the minor species in this region. The ones who are tired of paying tribute to both of you. Within 10 years, we have a network that bypasses both your empires entirely. Within 20 years, we're the dominant economic power in this entire sector. He zoomed in on the neutral zone. Meanwhile, you two keep staring at each other. Keep spending massive resources on fleets that do nothing. Keep stagnating. And in 30, maybe 40 years, you realize that you've become irrelevant. Not because we destroyed you, but because we simply moved on without you. The alternative projection showed what would happen if they agreed. Joint research stations producing breakthrough technologies. Trade routes flourishing in previously contested space. Both empires redirecting military resources to exploration and colonization. The galaxy opening up in ways it hadn't in centuries. Blake looked across the table at Commander Shaw. The Talaxian met his eyes, and for the first time, Blake didn't see an enemy. He saw someone facing the same impossible choice. Pride or survival. The past or the future. Shaw spoke first, his translator rendering his words carefully. If we do this, if we agree to these terms, how do we know you won't just use this opportunity to expand your own power? How do we know this isn't just a clever way to neutralize us while you take over? Mitchell smiled. You don't know. You have to trust us. Just like we have to trust you not to turn on each other the moment we look away. That's how this works. That's how peace works. It requires faith that everyone wants to build something better than what they had before. Blake made his decision. He'd been making it slowly over the past 6 days, but now it crystallized into certainty. He was tired of the standoff. Tired of wasting his life maintaining a status quo that benefited no one. Tired of being afraid of the future. I'll recommend acceptance to my government, he said quietly. I can't guarantee they'll listen, but I'll recommend it. Shaw nodded slowly. As will I. Captain Mitchell stood and extended his hand, a human gesture both aliens had learned meant friendship and agreement. First Blake, then Shaw, reached out and grasped it. The balance of power that had defined the galaxy for 3 centuries shattered in that moment. Not with violence or war, but with a handshake and the decision to try something different. The future had arrived, whether anyone was ready for it or not. 6 months. That's all it took for 300 years of careful balance to completely dissolve and be replaced by something nobody had imagined possible. The neutral zone, that vast empty stretch of space that had separated 2 galactic superpowers for longer than most species recorded history, simply ceased to exist. Not through conquest or destruction, but through something far more radical, cooperation. Where weapons platforms had once floated in silent vigilance, now there were trading posts. Where patrol routes had been memoized and followed religiously for generations, now there were shipping lanes full of merchant vessels from 3 different species. The Trinary Trade Corridor, they called it. A name that would have been unthinkable just half a year ago. Blake stood on the bridge of his reassigned vessel, watching the traffic flow past on his senses. VRYNN cargo haulers traveling alongside Talaxian transport ships, with human escorts ensuring safe passage for everyone. It still felt surreal. Every instinct he'd developed over his military career told him this was wrong, that those Talaxian ships were threats that needed to be tracked and targeted. But those instincts were obsolete now. The galaxy had moved on, and he was trying desperately to move with it. His crew was smaller now. The 60% reduction in military forces had meant tough choices. Good officers had been reassigned to civilian roles or early retirement. Ships that had served proudly for decades were being decommissioned or converted to non-military purposes. It hurt, watching an empire's military might diminish. But the resources freed up were being redirected to things that actually helped people. Research stations. Colony development. Infrastructure projects that had been delayed for years because all the funding went to maintaining useless fleets. The real miracle was happening at Joint Scientific Station Horizon. Blake had visited it twice now, and each time he was amazed that it existed at all. The station hung in what used to be the most contested space in the sector, a massive structure built by all 3 species working together. VRYNN engineers, with their natural talent for structural design, had planned the station's framework. Talaxian mathematicians had calculated everything from power distribution to gravitational balance. Human technicians had provided the advanced computing systems and manufacturing techniques that made the whole thing possible. Species that had been enemies were now sharing cafeterias, working side by side in laboratories, arguing about the best approaches to scientific problems instead of the best ways to kill each other. Captain Ryan Mitchell spent most of his time at Horizon now. The Indomitable had returned to Earth, its mission accomplished, but Mitchell had volunteered to stay as humanity's primary liaison. Blake found him on the observation deck, a massive transparent dome that offered a view of the construction that was still ongoing. Drones from 3 different species moved in coordinated patterns, assembling new modules, running power lines, expanding the station week by week. "Never gets old," Mitchell said without turning around. He'd somehow sensed Blake's arrival. Watching people build instead of destroy. Blake joined him at the window. A Talaxian construction team was installing some kind of sensor array on a newly completed module. A human engineer floated nearby in a spacesuit, offering advice that the Talaxians seemed to be actually considering. "My government is still divided," Blake admitted. "Half think you're the best thing that ever happened to us. The other half think you destroyed everything we stood for." Mitchell smiled slightly. "What do you think?" "I think you shattered 300 years of stability in less than a week," Blake said carefully. "I think you forced changes that we would never have made on our own. I think you took away our certainty, our clear understanding of who we were and what our purpose was." "But," Mitchell prompted. "But I also think we were dying," Blake continued quietly. "Not physically, but as a civilization. We were so focused on not losing that we forgot how to win. We forgot how to grow. We were just existing, maintaining the same tired patterns year after year, generation after generation." Mitchell nodded. "Stability isn't always healthy. Sometimes it's just another word for stagnation. Sometimes it's just rigor mortis wearing a fancy name to make itself sound better." A VRYNN transport ship drifted past the window, its hull bearing the new insignia of the Trinary Trade Consortium. Blake watched it go, thinking about how much had changed. "You and the Talaxians were so comfortable in your balance," Mitchell continued. "Neither side could win, so neither side would lose. Safe. Predictable. Boring. You forgot how to actually live. And humans live by disrupting everything you encounter." Blake asked, though there was curiosity in his voice rather than accusation. "We live by refusing to accept that things can't change," Mitchell corrected. "Earth was dying when we reached for space. Our atmosphere was poisoned. Our oceans were rising. Our politics were fractured beyond repair. Everyone said it was too late, that we'd destroyed ourselves, that humanity's story was ending." He turned to face Blake directly. "But we didn't accept that. We couldn't afford to accept that. So we changed everything. Changed how we generated power. Changed how we grew food. Changed how we governed ourselves. Changed how we thought about being human. It was hard. It was painful. A lot of people fought against it every step of the way. But we did it because the alternative was extinction. And now you're forcing that same change on everyone else," Blake observed. "We're offering an alternative," Mitchell said. "Big difference. You could have refused. Both empires could have said no, maintained your standoff, and watched us build our own network around you. Some of your politicians wanted exactly that. But you chose differently. You chose to try something new." Blake couldn't argue with that. The decision had ultimately come down to simple pragmatism. Stay frozen in place and become irrelevant, or embrace change and remain significant. When framed that way, the choice was obvious even if the execution was terrifying. The changes rippled outward beyond just the VRYNN and Talaxians. The Council of Free Worlds had formally recognized United Earth as a major galactic power after only 6 months. It had taken some species centuries to achieve that recognition. But humanity had already signed treaties with 17 different species, established trade relationships with dozens more, and set up diplomatic missions in 12 different sectors. The humans offered something that neither the VRYNN nor the Talaxians had ever provided: partnership without domination. They didn't demand tribute. They didn't require military alliances. They just wanted to trade, to share knowledge, to build connections. Species that had spent centuries carefully avoiding taking sides in the Cold War suddenly found themselves free to make their own choices. The relief was palpable across the galaxy. Mitchell's assistant, a young human named Tyler, arrived with status reports. Blake noticed how comfortable Tyler seemed working with aliens. No hesitation, no fear, just casual professionalism. That was another thing about humans. They adapted fast. Within months of first contact, they'd learned alien languages, customs, social protocols. They made mistakes, sure, but they learned from them and moved on. "The latest construction schedule shows we'll be ready for full operations in 3 more months," Tyler reported. "We're ahead of schedule," Actually, the Talaxian team figured out a faster way to integrate the power systems. Mitchell grinned. See? That's what happens when people actually work together instead of threatening each other. Innovation happens. Blake thought about his own people working alongside humans and Talaxians. Engineers who'd spent careers designing better weapons now designing better living habitats. Scientists who'd calculated optimal firing solutions now calculating optimal trade routes. Officers who'd planned battles now planning peaceful expansion into unclaimed territories. It was messy. There were arguments, misunderstandings, and occasional clashes of culture and procedure. The humans were often too casual, moving too fast, taking risks that made everyone else nervous. The Talaxians were rigid in their processes, insisting on extensive testing and validation. The VRYNN fell somewhere in between, trying to balance caution with progress. But it worked. Somehow, impossibly, it worked. More human ships arrived every week. Not warships like the Indomitable, though everyone knew humanity maintained a powerful fleet back in their home systems. These were colony ships, research vessels, merchant freighters, and diplomatic cruisers. Each one brought more humans eager to explore, to trade, to learn, to build. They brought teachers who helped alien species understand human technology, engineers who shared manufacturing techniques, diplomats who mediated disputes and built bridges, artists and musicians who shared human culture and learned about alien cultures in return. Humanity wasn't trying to conquer the galaxy. They were trying to join it, to become part of something larger while still remaining distinctly human. Blake watched a mixed crew of humans and VRYNN installing a new sensor array on one of Horizon's outer modules. They moved in coordinated patterns, communicating through translators but understanding each other well enough to work efficiently. 6 months ago, those same individuals might have been shooting at each other. Now they were building something together. You changed everything, Blake said finally. The old alliances are breaking apart. New ones are forming. Species that stayed neutral for centuries are choosing sides now. The whole political structure of this region is being rewritten. Good, Mitchell replied simply. The old structure was built on fear and stagnation. Time for something better. Something messier maybe, something louder and more chaotic. But also something alive. Something that grows and changes and adapts. He pointed out the window at the bustling traffic, the construction, the cooperation. This is what happens when people stop being afraid of change. When they realize that the future doesn't have to look like the past. That's the real lesson we're trying to teach. Not technology or tactics or trade agreements. Just the simple idea that things can be different if you're brave enough to try. Blake stood there for a long time, watching the new galaxy being built outside the window. Humanity had arrived from nowhere, broken everything, and then helped rebuild it into something nobody had imagined possible. The balance of power hadn't shifted. It had shattered completely. And from the pieces, something new was emerging. Something messy and uncertain and sometimes scary. But also something full of possibility, full of potential, full of life. The old galaxy was dying. The new galaxy was being born. And Blake was starting to think that maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what everyone needed. The most dangerous question in the galaxy was spreading from species to species, world to world. What if we stopped being afraid to change? And nobody knew where that question would lead, but everyone was finally ready to find out.